The dust of Bethlehem tasted different on her return. It tasted of ghosts. She remembered this road, this gate, this familiar slope of the land, but they no longer remembered her. Not the real her. Not Naomi. The name meant pleasant, and it had once fit perfectly, like a well-worn sandal. She remembered sunlight spilling over barley fields, the air thick with the promise of harvest. She remembered the low, warm timbre of her husband Elimelech's voice at dusk, a sound that meant safety, that meant home. The memory of her son's small, sticky hands reaching for hers was so vivid, it was a physical ache in her chest. Then the famine came. A slow, creeping thief. It stole the green from the land and the hope from their hearts. Their journey to Moab was an act of desperation, a flight from a silent, starving God. But Moab was no sanctuary. It was a land of foreign gods and shallow graves. First Elimelech, then Mahlon, then Chilion. One after another, the men she loved were swallowed by the earth. She was left with 2 Moabite daughters-in-law, a shared grief, their only common language. Years later, walking back through those same Bethlehem gates, she was a spectre, a woman hollowed out by absence. Whispers followed her like stray dogs. Is this Naomi? The question wasn't a greeting. It was an accusation of survival. It felt like salt being ground into a wound that would never close. She turned to the murmuring faces, her own face a mask of stone. Do not call me Naomi, she said, her voice raspy from disuse. Call me Marah, for the Almighty has dealt very bitterly with me. I went away full, and the Lord has brought me back empty. She believed every word. Empty of husband, empty of sons, empty of a future, empty of purpose. Ruth, her Moabite daughter-in-law, walked beside her, a silent, stubborn shadow of loyalty. But in Naomi's grief-narrowed vision, Ruth was just another reminder of loss, a living monument to her dead son. She couldn't see the blessing for the shadow it cast. The old family home felt smaller, shrunken. Or perhaps she had just grown heavier, weighed down by a sorrow so dense it had its own gravity. The nights were a special kind of torment. In the crushing dark, memories ambushed her. Elimelech's final, rattling cough, the fading strength in her son's eyes, the hollow thud of foreign earth hitting wooden coffins. The sound echoed in the silence of her empty house. And a single, terrifying thought hardened inside her like a shard of flint. If God is all-powerful, then he chose this. He orchestrated this ruin. That thought was a poison she drank every night. Survival, however, is a relentless master. When Ruth offered to go and clean in the fields, to gather the scraps left behind by the harvesters, Naomi simply nodded. There was no other choice. Hunger erases pride. But one evening, Ruth returned, her face flushed with effort, her arms laden with an impossible amount of barley. An entire ephah. Far more than any cleaner could hope to gather. For the first time in years, a flicker of something other than grief sparked in Naomi. Suspicion. Where did you work today? She demanded. In whose field have you found such favor? The man's name is Boaz. Ruth answered, her voice soft. The name landed in the silence of the room. Boaz, a relative of her husband Elimelech, a kinsman redeemer. A small crack appeared in the stone of her bitterness. Naomi's lips moved slowly, forming words that felt strange and unfamiliar on her tongue. May he be blessed by the Lord, she whispered, who has not stopped showing his kindness to the living and the dead. Kindness. It was a word from a forgotten language. In the days that followed, the crack widened. Ruth came home each evening not just with grain, but with stories. Stories of protection from the other workers. Stories of water drawn just for her. Stories of handfuls of barley left intentionally in her path. A quiet, steady generosity that asked for nothing in return. Naomi listened, her mind sifting through the details, searching for a pattern. At first, she dismissed it as luck, a fortunate coincidence. But hope, once planted, is a stubborn, unruly thing. It finds the cracks. It seeks the light. One night, long after Ruth's steady breathing filled the small room, Naomi lay awake. The moon cast long shadows across the floor, and for the first time in a decade, she wasn't just remembering. She was planning. The strategist, the mother, the wife, the woman she used to be stirred from her long slumber. The next evening, her voice was different. It carried the weight of authority, not just sorrow. Wash yourself, she told Ruth. Anoint yourself and put on your best clothes. Then go down to the threshing floor. She laid out the plan with precision, a general mapping a battlefield. Where to wait, when to approach, what to say, how to claim the protection of a kinsman redeemer. It was audacious. It was risky. It was a desperate gamble. It was hope, finally wearing the clothes of wisdom. Ruth returned at the first blush of dawn, her eyes shining, her arms once again full of barley given as a promise. Naomi saw it in her face, in the way she carried herself. This wasn't just a girl who had gleaned in a field. This was a woman who had glimpsed a future. A profound calm settled over Naomi. "Wait, my daughter, until you learn how the matter turns out," she said, her voice a quiet certainty. "For the man will not rest until he has settled it today." She spoke as someone who remembered the covenant ways of her people, who understood the deep currents of law and tradition. The Almighty, who had seemed so distant and cruel, now felt intimately close, moving in these small, tangible acts of mercy. When Boaz went to the city gate, Naomi stood at the edge of the crowd, hidden in the shadows, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. She watched as he negotiated with the nearer kinsman, her breath held tight in her chest. It could all still unravel. It could all fall apart. This fragile, fledgling hope could be crushed under the heel of custom or cowardice. But it wasn't. Boaz secured the right of redemption. He would marry Ruth. He would redeem the family land. He would restore the family name. The house that had echoed with grief began to fill with new sounds. Laughter, the bustle of preparation, the promise of life, and then the cry of a newborn. A son. They placed the baby in Naomi's arms. He was so small, so perfect. His tiny fingers curled around her own with an unconscious, absolute trust. The women of Bethlehem, the same women who had whispered at her return, now gathered around her, their faces bright with joy. "Praise be to the Lord," they sang, "who this day has not left you without a kinsman redeemer." Naomi looked down at the infant's face, and something inside her, something that had been frozen for a decade, finally broke. She had called herself Marah, bitter. She had been so sure that was the end of her story. But she saw it now with a clarity that stuck her eyes. She had not come back empty. She had come back with Ruth. She had come back with a loyalty stronger than death, a love that had followed her out of a foreign land and into the heart of her sorrow. God had not been absent in her pain. He had been weaving a story of redemption in the shadows, working quietly when all she could see was loss. He hadn't crushed her. He had carried her through famine and graves and exile. He had carried her into a future she could never have designed. They named the child Obed, which means servant. Naomi held him close, feeling the warmth of his small body against hers. The name Naomi no longer felt like a cruel joke. For the first time in so long, it felt possible again. It felt like coming home.